This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Kathryn and I are so excited to have Becca Puglisi here. Becca is the co-author, along with Alida Kathryn, of the Emotional Thesaurus and all of its sequels, including the Emotional Wound Thesaurus. So today, we're talking everything emotional wounds, and Becca is an international speaker, a writing coach, and a best-selling author. Her books are available in 5 languages. They are sourced by U.S. universities, used by novelists, screenwriters, editors, and psychologists around the world. That one caught my attention.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. She is passionate about learning and sharing her knowledge through her Writers Helping Writers blog and One Stop for Writers, a powerhouse online library created to help writers elevate their storytelling. You can find her at both of those online spots, as well as Facebook and Twitter. Welcome, Becca.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we are excited to have you. So what inspired or made you decide to write these thesauri? What is the genesis of this?
Yeah, it started with the Emotional Thesaurus. That was the first one. Angela and I were in a critique group. This was back in like 2005. We were in a critique group and I was writing and I realized that my characters were always doing the same things. They were always smiling, shuffling their feet and shrugging their shoulders for whatever reason. That was my personal hang-up. And so I started keeping a list because I couldn't figure out how else to show these emotions. I started a list of different emotions and things that, I saw people doing or my body was doing. And I shared it with the group thinking, maybe they're struggling with the same thing. And they were like, yes, every one of us, different hangups, but all of us struggling. So that was really how that started. We started all kind of contributing. Everybody kind of petered out except till it was just me and Angela keeping these lists of different emotions. And then fast forward a couple of years, when we started the blog, I was getting ready to take a break. I was 6 months pregnant and she sent me an email and said, I want to start a blog. I think we should do it together. I really want content that people are going to come back for, that we can share like new each week. And maybe we could do the emotion list that we were doing. And that was really how the Emotional Thesaurus started. That was the very first one we did. And so then people responded really well to it. And we thought, well, what else do writers need help with? What else could we provide that isn't already out there? And we did, one on settings. We did one on colors and textures, different ways to describe those, weather, just all. I think we have 13 thesauruses now altogether. Wow. Some are published and some of them are not. But that was really how the whole thing started.
That is fantastic. What a great origin story for this resource coming out of your own need. What better way to know that something is going to be really, really useful. Now, tell us about the psychologist using your thesauri.
When the Emotional Thesaurus was published, we would get emails. We assumed, okay, this is good for writers. Writers need this, to tell how their characters are feeling, to show it in more unique ways. And we kept getting emails from just people that we had no idea would be using it. Like there was a psychologist who specialized in eating disorders, and she used it with her group to help them identify the emotions that would precede a trigger, that would precede them binging or kind of falling back into their habits that they were trying to avoid, so that they could recognize it when it was coming and kind of head it off before it came on. That one blew my mind. I mean, I couldn't believe that was just a way we had never envisioned it. We also had a lot of special ed teachers calling and saying, or emailing us saying they were using it with their kids who have a hard time, like on the autism spectrum, where they can't identify other people's emotions. And they would say, okay, look, this is what's happening when someone is getting frustrated with you, or when someone is angry, and this is how and that, again, completely, like, never imagined that someone would be able to use it that way. So we've just had a lot of different, very interesting, very rewarding emails letting us know how different people are using it. There was also a writer who was visually impaired. He had never seen anger or sadness on someone else's face. And so he said, I never really knew how, like, what they look like. But with the way the book is set up, I can now say, oh, he does this, or they look like this, or this is happening with them. And he said it for the first time, I kind of got a feel for how people might express the different emotions. I feel like they write it a lot better. So it's been really amazing.
That is
You're
amazing.
Talking about visual cues, right? Not like just like when you think thesaurus, you think different words that describe the same thing, but you're talking about completely different visual cues or auditory cues that would tell you about the emotion, correct?
Yeah, it's they're thesauruses in that they look at, each one looks at a collection of ideas that are all related and gives you new ways to express that.
Right.
So it's not a thesaurus like a typical thesaurus that gives you synonyms. They're all related ideas, related ways to show. A lot of them are really telling you how to show instead of tell emotions, character traits, settings, wounds, whatever the topic happens to be, by just giving you new ways to say kind of the old thing that we've all seen 100 times.
Right.
Which is so critical for us writers. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see a manuscript and the writer resorts to felt. He felt this, she felt that, they felt this, they felt. It's like, okay, no, you can't just tell us what she felt. You have to, and it's not enough to replace one word with another word, like sad with grieving. You can't just pick a new word. You need to go into the body and into the physical behavior. So it was really interesting when you were talking about the blind writer and the kids with autism, who don't have that normal visual or tactile experience of it. But even the rest of us, we're so used to not thinking about how to describe those things and how to show it. So you really need to step back and say, okay, he felt angry, but what is that like? Is the gut clenched? Is the chest tight? Is the brow constricted? Are the, fingers doing something nervous or whatever? So
it's writing is hard. I mean, the whole process of writing is hard. And so then when you can find an easy way to get your point across, we're all going to default to that. Showing, it's a lot more work. It's more word count. It's a lot more time. It's harder, so it's easy for us all to just, that first thing that comes to mind, put it down and move on. But that isn't what pulls people in. Readers need to feel like they have, that they're part of what's happening. Instead of sitting back and taking a passive listening role, they need to be able to experience those emotions and the memories and feel like they're in the settings that you're writing. So that's where the showing, it's hard work, and it takes a while to kind of get the knack of it, but it pays off in dividends in the long run because your readers are really engaged.
Right. Yeah. It's the most rewarding type of writing because, as you said, it's what draws the reader in. It's the only way to engage a reader viscerally and make that scene at that moment memorable. He felt angry isn't going to be remembered 2 pages down the line, but yeah. Now, I thought it was interesting in the foreword, you talk about emotional wounds being triggering, and you have a list of self-care for writers. Just I'm curious what you'd like to say about that, if this was just sort of reader beware, writer beware, or if you've had feedback from people where dealing with some of these emotions as a writer or as a reader has been triggering for people.
We haven't gotten any feedback. We were just super nervous about this from the very beginning when we first started. It's one thing to put it on a blog, and kind of explore it there. But when you're talking about publishing it and charging people, to buy it, we just were worried that, this was going to be this is very personal for people. You know, we're exploring it from, this is your character and what they've gone through and what would happen as a result. But these are things that have really happened to people, and they're horrible things. And we kind of got a tiny, tiny glimpse of it when we were just writing the material. We made a list of what we wanted to include. We split it in half. Angela writes one half, I write one half, and then we swap and we edit. And as we were writing, it was just really difficult, you know, just researching the different things and seeing the weight that people carry around based on these real life traumas. And so as we were writing it, we really realized we need to let people know up front, you know, kind of give them a warning that there could be triggering things, that there are going to be things that they may have personal experience with. They may go into it thinking, oh, this is going to be great for my character. And then they see, bam, you know, a whole entry on whatever it is that has really traumatized them in the past. So we wanted to give them some kind of just tips in the beginning of how you can use the book without it being quite as traumatic as it could have been.
Yeah. Have either of you had experience with this in your own writing process, where you decide to write about a topic and then, you know, find it's more challenging than you thought? In researching my second Scott Hall book, I found writing the horrible scenes was not difficult because I was behind the curtain, making everything happen and really thinking about the machinations of the scene and the effect I wanted it to have on the reader. But the process of researching, where I was, you know, being the passive viewer or reader of like true crime documentaries and reading about trauma people had really suffered, was very difficult.
Yeah. I did a workshop with Ellen Hopkins. I don't know if you know, she's a young adult writer. She writes novels in verse, and they're gritty and dark and have difficult subject matter, abuse, drug use, runaways. And she says in her workshops that it's all experiences that she's had with her own daughter. So it's all very, very personal and real, her writing. And she said one of the things she does, and she had us do it, was that if you have a situation you've experienced, she was actually talking about it from the point of emotion, where if you want to really get that emotion across, to think about a time in your life when you experienced that emotion in a big way, and to write about it from the point of view of the person you were at the time that it happened, as if it's happening right now. And that was really hard and super powerful. Just the things that came out, like when I did that, of details I didn't even know that were there at the time, the time of year that it was, that I hadn't thought about, you know, in years. So I think that, you know, from that point of view, just as an exercise and helping us get into that emotional frame of mind, you know, that can be really, really hard to do, especially and something that you have experience with. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Patricia Weaver Francisco wrote a memoir called Telling, a memoir of rape and recovery. And she said when she was writing the chapters about the experience of the rape, she went on a writer's retreat. So she was up on the shore of Lake Superior, and she said she would write a sentence or two and get up and go take a walk and come back and write a sentence or two and go take a walk, you know. So I was definitely thinking of that when I was reading your self-care for writers, and how important it is that we don't ignore that part of craft and what we set out to do when we write something like this into our story. You said, shifting gears here, you said, I'm going to quote the book, "We need to acknowledge that storytelling resonates deepest when it provides readers with something they are always searching for: context." And then paraphrasing, fiction allows readers a safe way to explore their own deeper layers. And I just loved that you brought up context and put that into the framework around this thesaurus. What about context? What else would you say about context, and why is that so important for this aspect of storytelling?
Well, there's so many books available now. I mean, there's so many books that that people can be reading. And we want them reading our books. We want them falling in love with our characters and telling other people about them and, buying the sequels and rushing to find out, what other books we've written. We want to create that sense of loyalty and kind of this raving fan situation. And I think that the way you do that is to make the reader care about your story, about your characters. It happens with the characters. And the best way I think is that you create a situation with your characters that is familiar to the reader, because they feel a connection immediately because they've been through it, or they've experienced it, or they've thought those kind of things, had those kind of feelings. I think, through writing this, we came to the conclusion that we're all, no matter where we are, what we believe, we all are kind of on a journey throughout life to do better and be better and improve ourselves in some way. We don't want to be the same in 10 years as we were yesterday. And that's really the journey that the character's going on. They're trying to improve themselves in some way. They're trying to crawl out of a hole or a bad situation, or just make themselves, be better, learn something that they've always wanted to do, improve themselves in some way. And I think everybody gets that. I think everybody, even on a subconscious level, they recognize that that need for just wanting to be better, do better, leave the world a better place than it was when we came into it. And so when we can incorporate an element of that, whether it's through self-growth over the course of a novel, or if it's through revelation of, I thought that I was this way, but I realized that I have this to deal with, and now I have to face it and move forward. Those are the kind of journeys that I think people they resonate with people. Our readers are these people on these same journeys. So when we can create that sense of context with our characters, it translates to them, and it just builds a deeper connection with them.
Are you enjoying this week's episode of the Storyworks Roundtable? Is your writing improving with our ongoing conversations about all things storycraft? Do you feel a little less isolated as a writer, like you have a seat at the round table? If so, we would love your support. Please rate and review us wherever you find this podcast, on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. Take 2 minutes, let the world know what you think of the Storyworks Roundtable. It will really help us be discovered by other writers just like you. Thanks for listening, and enjoy this week's episode. Yeah, so could we say that by the reader identifying with the character and the character's journey, it gives that character's journey, the thing we've written, gives them some context for framing their own searches and their own quests, because we're so wrapped up in our day-to-day lives and the mundane things we have to do that we aren't always thinking about these inner struggles and these emotional journeys. And, that process, you were saying we don't want to be the same person 10 years from now. We were yesterday. Yeah.
And I think that, like you were saying with the day-to-day stuff, that we do tend to get stagnant because we're dealing with the things that have to be dealt with, it's the driving and the cooking and all of the things that have to get done, but they're not really fulfilling us, and so when we see a character who is pursuing that and is compelled to work through and move on to that next level, it's inspiring. And I think so much of it is subconscious. I don't, I'm reading a story and I'm really into it and I love the character, and I'm not thinking to myself, well, this is just like me, or, I wish I had the time to learn a foreign language, or whatever it is that their goal is and they're going through. But it just, on a subconscious level, it resonates. I really think that it does.
Right. Well, and I think one of the beauties of fiction and storytelling is that it can take those universal human experiences and sort of put them on steroids. So the novel about the woman who, has an affair that leads to a divorce that leads to a whole new life, that might be something the reader would never in a million years experience. Right. But you can take maybe the seed of dissatisfaction or the seed of longing for a new life or personal growth or adventure or whatever the reader can identify with, and then kind of blow it up into story, into that larger than life journey. And so that gives the reader the context, the framework for exploring that emotional truth, that is shared.
That's a really good point, because in and of itself, the journey that we're on is very, a lot of times it's very quiet. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be super exciting, mm-hmm. And we know that with stories, you need to have that ramped up kind of elevated situation. And so being able to write it in a bigger, more obvious, more dramatic way does kind of accomplish two things. It shows still that journey, but it's in a way that does, it is more engaging. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the beauty of story.
It is.
It is. And let's talk about backstory. How you say emotional wounds often occur during the formative years, which is so true. I was reading these essays before we get to the actual thesaurus section and thinking, oh, this is like so many self-help books. You're saying characters, but you could be saying you. You person, So that just highlights the importance of the character's backstory, because it has so much to do with the way our character acts and reacts throughout the course of the entire story. So what would either of you like to say about backstory?
Well, Stephen King says that the truth about backstory is that everybody has one, and it's not very interesting. Mm-hmm. So we have this dichotomy of okay, I need to know my character's backstory, but I can't reveal like 90% of it. I'm not going to actually put out there. And so I think that's why a lot of people, when you start talking about backstory, they're like, oh, God, you're so boring. Because we've all read it, in the stories. It's in this big lump in the beginning, and it's totally boring.
Yes.
But it's, for the author, it's so, so important to know, because characters are people. This is what I have learned really through the writing of these books, is that they are a mirror of real life. And in order for them to resonate with readers, they have to be realistic. And for them to be realistic, they can't be created in a vacuum or, just pulling, oh, I like this trait and I like this hobby and I'm going to give them, red hair and it's going to be tall. It's got to be, they have to be who they are based on the real life things that make people who they are. And all of that comes out of the backstory, out of the things that have happened to them, the people that have influenced them, the lessons that they have learned in various situations, all good and bad. It all creates the person that is in your story today. So who they are in your story today is directly linked to these things that have happened to them in their past.
Right.
And so we have to know what those important things are. We don't have to know everything, but we have to know the formative moments and people and experiences so that we know how they influence the person. What traits have come out of that they are now embracing? What habits or quirks do they have now because of that? What are their moral code, comes out of a lot of times the influencers in their life. And all of that is going to influence their behavior, their choices, what story goal they have. It's all related to the backstory. It's super, super important to figure out.
It is so important. And I like, so in the Storyworks Guide to Writing Character, I made a distinction between history and backstory to help writers think of what do I include and what do I not include, so we avoid those big info dumps. So as you're saying, everything that shapes our character is important for us to know as the writer. And that can be that personal history that the reader, that 90% the reader may never need to know. And then the backstory is that piece that's relevant to the now story. That's what you need to weave in for the readers. So before people get scared and do that, no, not backstory. Don't make me develop my character's life. Just think of, as you were saying, those key moments that shape who they are and how they behave now, but then know that there's only that 10%, that tip of the iceberg that you need to actually weave into the story itself.
Exactly. And that's the hard part, is figuring out, what do I need to know? How far do I have to go? And it's different with every character. The protagonist, obviously, you're going to dig really deep and find those really important pieces. I think that's really important for the villain too. I guess not for everyone, because there are stories where the villain is kind of I was looking at one of your past podcasts about the villain and how sometimes they don't have a point of view. And so you don't really get into who he is or why he's doing whatever. But I find that the villains that are the most compelling are the ones that I see used to be like semi-normal. They were, they could have ended up just like me, but because something terrible happened, and the way that they, chose to go, or because of the lack of support in their life or whatever it was, they ended up taking a completely different path. So, different characters are going to require different amounts of backstory. The love interest or the best friend, the mentor, I mean, those aren't going to require nearly as much, but there are things, that you're going to need to know.
Right.
So it's just hard to know how much. I love research. I love the planning stage. So I get a little lost in there, where I'm like, I could do that forever.
Yeah.
You have to know when to
start writing.
Yes, exactly. Cut the cord.
I think we could do that too, couldn't we? Just keep journaling, keep learning.
Oh yeah, forever.
The discovery process is so fun. So you brought up villains and moral beliefs, and I love that you talked about the character's moral line, that do not cross line, and also villains in this book. So let's talk about villains and the moral beliefs, that moral code.
Yeah, we actually, we got finished with the whole book, and we were in the editing process, and Angela sent me an email, this panicked email. We don't have anything about villains in this book. We were like, how did that happen? So that actually came kind of at the end. And in exploring that, we found that the protagonist and the antagonist are really, their journey is very similar. They're similar kinds of people. They have likable traits. They have things that are good about them and bad about them. But one of the ways that they differ is that there is a line. Everybody has a line, but the villain's line is like, it is way out there. He's willing to go much, much farther in the pursuit of his goal, which he believes is a worthy goal. It may be abhorrent to us, but to him, it makes total sense for him to be pursuing this goal. And he's going to do way more to get it than the protagonist would. The protagonist has, his line is drawn much, much early on. And because of his moral code, he's going to say, I can't, that's not right. I'm not willing to do this to get what I want. And that's really, I think, one of the big differentiators between the good guy and the bad guy.
Definitely. And I think it's interesting, too, when we pit them against each other to see how the protagonist's moral line will shift as the stakes get higher and as the conflict gets bigger, because we're putting them in situations where they have to make more and more difficult choices, the sort of choices you don't find in everyday mundane life, Right. And that's one of the things I think also pulls people in, is when you make them think about themselves. When you look at the movie, with Hugh Jackman, where his, what was the name of that? Where his daughter was just kidnapped. That's going to drive me nuts. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, his daughter disappears, and he's like upright citizen, Mr. Moral, good guy, but he thinks he knows who's done it. So the police are not listening. They don't think that this guy is responsible. And he goes and basically kidnaps this guy and tortures him to get him to tell him where his daughter is. And it creates the situation where you're, sitting back and watching and thinking, yeah, I'm this guy. I'm this guy. I'm, I love my family, and I would be, so upset if something happened to my daughter. I'm not the bad guy. But then he, as, his need for
saving his daughter and getting that safety and security back is threatened, he pushes farther and farther past what he normally would have done. He ends up doing things that he never would have done before. And it makes you as the viewer kind of go, oh gosh, would I do that? Would I take it that far? I don't know. But then I think that that's another thing that pulls readers in is when we create these scenarios with our protagonists that create kind of moral dilemmas, moral questions that make us question ourselves and wonder.
Yeah, definitely. It goes back to what we were saying earlier about the reader identifying with the characters through those emotional experiences. And, we hope we would never be put in that situation, but we can live it vicariously through the character if it's well written and visceral enough. And then, do what you were saying, have that introspective moment of, would I do that? Would I be capable of that? Definitely. Wow, we should wrap this up, but we could keep talking for another hour, I think, about all the all the wonderful material in this book and character emotions. I do just want to let everybody know that the thesaurus section of the book is really incredibly useful. So one entry, being held captive. First, you've got examples: being kidnapped, held for ransom, sold into slavery, etc. Basic needs compromised by that wound: safety and security, love and belonging, esteem and recognition, self-actualization, false beliefs that could be embraced as a result of this trauma. I'm an easy mark, I'll never be the same, my judgment is faulty and can't be trusted, etc. The character may fear having power and freedom stolen, trusting the wrong person. So in the next category, possible responses and results. So I just want people to get a sense of how comprehensive this guide is. Becoming cautious almost to the point of paranoia, hyper-awareness of one's surroundings, sensitivity to trigger stimuli. And of course, I'm not reading everything. There's so much more on here. And then personality traits that could form, triggers that might aggravate the wound, and opportunities to face or overcome the wound. So really, such an impressive resource you have put together, and I hope, I think every writer will find this so useful.
Oh, thank you. We're excited. There's nothing really out there about it right now. And I just think it has a lot of good possibilities for characters and really making them real.
Definitely. All right. Well, that has been it for this week's StoryWorks Roundtable. Do come back for another companion episode. We are going to talk about character arcs and the place emotional wounds have in those character arcs with Becca Puglisi. Are you ready to take your storycraft to the next level? StoryWorks Fiction Online School has courses available right now, from micro courses on character traits to master-level workshops on plot and building characters. There are also live workshops with your instructor in the classroom with you every week, guiding your progress and workshopping your manuscripts along the way. All students enrolled in StoryWorks Fiction, whether active in a class or not, can take advantage of the monthly free live Q&A calls with Alida. Check out storyworksfiction.com today and take your storycraft to the next level. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.